Augustine talks about this, and he's not happy with it. He does not like this. These pagans are coming into the church, bringing with them all sorts of pagan elements and Christianizing them. Augustine doesn't like it. Some of the bishops in his area, they didn't like it. They see these men and women dancing at these feasts, and they're like, I don't know about this dancing stuff. It's kind of weird. Or women not wearing a veil, showing their hair, maybe even showing their ankles. They're like, what is going on? Their concept of modesty was obviously very different than many in the United States today. But the point was, there's all this dancing going on at these feasts, and some of the women are showing their hair and even their ankles, and what in the world is going on? This is just completely inappropriate. Why is this happening? You know, they're horrified by some of this stuff. Well, Augustine gives us a curious answer. He says, for when peace came after so many and such violent persecutions, crowds of pagans wishing to become Christians were prevented from doing this because of their habit of celebrating the feast days of their idols with banquets and carousing. So he's saying, you know, a lot of these pagans, they found it hard to become a Christian. Why? Well, they'd have to give up these feast days to their idols, and they really love their feast days, and they love the carousing. So they found it really difficult to give that up. And since it was not easy for them to abstain from these dangerous but ancient pleasures, our ancestors, he's talking about the bishops before him in Hippo and others in North Africa, as well as really just all over, right? Our ancestors thought it would be good to make a concession for the time being to their weaknesses. You know, because these pagans are weak, because they're so attached to their feasts and carousing, our ancestors said, let's make a concession here. Let's make this work. And permit them, instead of the feast they had renounced, to celebrate other feasts in honor of the holy martyrs. Not with the same sacrilege, but with the same elaborateness and luxury. So he's saying, look, okay, they can't celebrate their feast to the idols. We can't allow that in Christianity for obvious reasons, but we can allow them to do the same stuff, the same feasts, the same things they love to do with the feast for the idols, but just do it to the martyrs instead of the idols. That was the idea. And Augustine's very open about this. He doesn't like it in some cases, but he's being very candid in explaining why this is happening and why it's going on. It was out of concession. You can't expect too much from the pagans, so allow them to continue their pagan practices, but just change the name of this god to the name of a saint. This is St. Augustine. And it's not just him, and it's not just limited to the ones I'm going to show you, but Augustine's a huge one. But also Jerome, St. Jerome, gave us the Latin Vulgate, incredibly important church father. Much like St. Augustine, very important. I'd argue in some cases, Augustine might be even more important. But in other areas, Jerome might even be more important in some cases, right? Especially with the Vulgate. Both of these heavy hitters, and they knew each other. And by the way, they squared off with each other. So they fought with each other back and forth. They didn't agree theologically on some points. But anyways, Jerome is confronted with the reality of this. And he's talking to somebody who says, look, what in the world are you doing? Jerome, you got all these pagan practices going on right in front of you, and you're allowing this. You're allowing the Christians to engage in these pagan practices. Why would you allow that? That's wrong. Watch how Jerome explains it and defends it. As to the question of tapers, however, we do not, as you in vain misrepresent us, light them in the daytime. He's saying we don't light the candles in the daytime. Remember that canon against doing that? But by their solace we would cheer the darkness of the night and watch the dawn, lest we should be blind like you and sleep in darkness. And if some persons, being ignorant and simple-minded laymen, or at all events religious women, he seems to have thought very poorly here of religious women, right? I mean, you know, if there's some really ignorant people out there like religious women, he would have been canceled today, right? Simple-minded laymen, or at all events religious women, of whom we can truly say, then referring to Romans, I allow that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. In other words, they're passionate about the faith, but they don't know what they're talking about. If those people adopt the practice in honor of the martyrs, what harm is done thereby to you? So, you know, that thing that Augustine was talking about, them taking these pagan practices, taking it from paganism, and instead of doing it to an idol, just do it to a martyr. Jerome's like, look, if they do this in ignorance because they don't know what they're doing, they don't know what they're talking about, what's the problem? Once upon a time, even the apostles pleaded that the ointment was wasted, but they were rebuked by the voice of the Lord. Christ did not need the ointment, nor do martyrs need the light of tapers, and yet that woman poured out the ointment in honor of Christ. And her heart's devotion was accepted. So in other words, the martyrs don't need you lighting candles near their tomb. But you know what? God might still honor the intentions of their heart, even if they don't know what they're doing, even if they don't realize they're wrong for this. All those who light these tapers have their reward according to their faith, as the apostle says. Let everyone abound in his own meaning. Do you call men of this sort idolaters? I do not deny that all of us who believe in Christ have passed from the era of idolatry. For we are not born Christians, but we become Christians by being born again. And because we formerly worshipped idols, does it follow that we ought now, not now, to worship God, lest we seem to pay like honor to him and idols? In the one case, respect was paid to the idols, and therefore the ceremony was to be abhorred, to be rejected. But in the other, the martyrs are venerated, and the same ceremony is therefore to be allowed. So he's outright saying, look, this practice was wrong because it was done to idols. But you know what? As long as it's done to the martyrs, it's okay. So again, it's the concept of taking elements of paganism, even liturgical elements of paganism, and instead of doing it to an idol, doing it to a martyr. Now, let me blow your mind here without getting in too far off track. Is that exactly what the Vatican was attempting to do with the quote-unquote Pachamama controversy and other elements that you see with John Paul II, kind of taking some of these elements and bringing them into the liturgy, or the Mayan liturgy, or X, Y, and Z, all this stuff that you hear about? Is that what's kind of going on? Well, I find it curious that a lot of people will criticize those things today, especially traditional Catholics criticize those things. But ironically, those things are present in the very liturgies in which they venerate and love. They just don't realize it. And it's right there in church history as a practice. They just don't realize it anymore because they're no longer in that context. Hey, if you enjoyed that video, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and the like button. And also consider supporting me on Patreon, patreon.com/Reason and Theology.